Hi, this is Chris Young. Welcome to episode 54 of Contemplating Life, Oscar edition. It's time to kick off my second annual review of the 10 films nominated for Best Picture Oscars. Last year, out of the 10 films nominated for Best Picture, there were 3 that I didn't care for at all, and 1 that I could sort of take or leave. One of the films that I disliked ended up being the winner, Everything Everywhere All at Once. I understood what the movie was trying to do. I understood why some people liked it. But in the end, I never really cared for the characters as much as I should have. There were some emotional payoffs at the end of the movie, but I didn't think it was worth the wait. After reading my review, one friend of mine who agreed with me described the movie as a hot mess. That pretty much sums up my opinion of it. I also didn't care for the war movie All Quiet on the Western Front, or the movie Triangle of Sadness. I understood why The Banshees of Inisherin was nominated. I thought it had some amazing performances, but I was quite neutral on the film itself. As I'm writing this, I've only seen 9 out of 10 of the nominated films, and I'm quite pleased to say I feel 8 of them are very much Oscar-worthy. There's nothing really wrong with the other one, but I found it only marginally interesting. I'm not really sure it's Oscar caliber. From what I've heard about the remaining film that I've not yet seen, I have high hopes for it. So overall, in my opinion, it's already a much better year than it was last year. I'm really looking forward to sharing it with you. Looking over these 10 films, I've discovered they could be grouped into pairs. There are 2 biopics of famous people. There are 2 films about grumpy, unlikable intellectual academics who are trying to break out of their shell. We have 2 films that give us insights into cultures with which we may have little familiarity. And there are 2 films about women who start out as the fantasy ideals of men, but come into their own, like a robot emerging into sentience, to become fully self-actualized and independent beings. Although 2 of these films were huge box office successes, we don't have the typical popcorn-eating big-budget action films like we had last year with Avatar 2 and Top Gun 2. Incidentally, none of these films are sequels, and only one has the potential to become part of a franchise. And incidentally, I hope it doesn't. Last year, I jammed 10 films into 3 episodes, making several of the episodes quite long. We have a tiny bit more room in the schedule this year, so I'm thinking there'll be maybe 4 or 5 episodes total. If I have some time, we'll include some brief looks at nominated performances in films that did not earn Best Picture nominations. The Oscars will be awarded on Sunday, March 10th, 2024. Although my reviews tend to include fairly significant plot summaries, trust me, I'm not going to spoil any major plot twists. I'll include some box office numbers that are current as of the writing of the script, as reported by IMDb, and that website also lists the number of nominations and wins of other awards. But it's a huge number. Most of these awards are so obscure you've never heard of them. I will point out other major awards as appropriate. So, in this episode, we're going to look at 2 films in a group I call the Grumpy Academics. The first on our agenda is The Holdovers. Paul Giamatti stars as Paul Hunnam. He's a history teacher at a boys' boarding school somewhere in New England in 1970. All but 5 of the boys will be going home for Christmas break. These 5 holdovers have to stay behind because their parents are otherwise occupied and the boys can't go home. Hunnam is given the inevitable task of being their guardian for 2 weeks. He teaches a class in ancient civilizations at the prestigious Barton Academy, where he is equally hated by his students and faculty. That includes the headmaster, who was one of Hunnam's students at Barton years ago. Hunnam is also an alum. He's constantly trying to get everyone, his boss included, to live up to the high standards and principles of the Barton Academy, as established by his founder, his mentor, the late Dr. Green. Hunnam is constantly mocked by his students and the staff, and given the nickname Walleye, because he does indeed have a wandering, lazy eye. He's forced into this babysitting task against his will, not only because he's disliked by everyone, but because he also refused to give an unearned passing grade to the son of a rich donor to the institution. In addition to Hunnam and the five boys, we are introduced to Mary Lamb, the cafeteria manager, who will stay behind to prepare meals for them. Mary is grieving the loss of her son, who was recently killed in Vietnam. The son had attended Barton. Mary couldn't afford to send him to college, which would have earned him a potentially life-saving draft deferment. This dilemma was typical for many young men of modest means, especially African Americans. Although we're never told so, it's easy to assume her son was only able to attend the expensive private school based on some sort of employee discount. And we're left to our imagination as to what it was like for a poor African American student to try to fit in at a prestigious private school, which was mostly rich white kids. Initially, there were only supposed to be 4 students holding over for the holidays, but it was pretty obvious that one of the other students, named Angus Tully, would be held over as well. He was bragging he had big plans to go to St. Kitts in the Caribbean with his mother and her new husband. The film spends too much time focusing on his character early on if he was going to disappear from the story with hundreds of other students. So it's no surprise to us in the audience when his mother calls at the last minute to tell him he will not be joining them on vacation. The vacation is now going to be a honeymoon for her and his new stepdad. This was just one of several plot points which come as no surprise. As we get to learn more about the 5 boys, they all seem to be thinly drawn stereotypes caught in a Breakfast Club remake. While there are a few other unoriginal tropes throughout the film, it turns out it's by far a much better story than it initially appears. Now here's a minor spoiler. After a few days of dealing with the 5 boys, one of them arranges to have his father's staff pick him up in a helicopter and take him on a ski trip for the remainder of Christmas break. They obtain permission from the parents of 3 of the other younger boys to join him. Angus's mother cannot be reached to obtain permission for him to join them because she's too busy enjoying her honeymoon. This leaves him as the only boy stranded with the old curmudgeon. So, by about 20 minutes into the story, we realize it's going to be a character exploration of Hunnam, Angus, and Mary. There's a janitor on the premises, but he doesn't show up often or contribute significantly to the story. These 3 diverse characters, who are essentially castaways trapped in an empty institution, are forced to get along with one another, and they reveal themselves in ways they don't particularly care to. Mary is attempting to work through her grief while trying to be a peacemaker between the boy and the crotchety old man. To escape the drudgery of their existence, they take a trip to the nearby town for dinner, where they discover that the headmaster's secretary, Miss Crane, has a part-time job as a waitress in the pub. She helps them to diffuse a confrontation with a townie who despises the Barton boys. There are some hints of chemistry between the waitress and the teacher, yet he's too shy to pursue a relationship. Miss Crane invites all three of them to a Christmas Eve party, but it doesn't go very well. Mary tries to suggest that the teacher do something nice for the boy on Christmas Day, but his feeble attempts to do so fall flat. When he asks the boy what he really wants, the boy declares they should take a trip to Boston. Hunnam is persuaded to agree on the premise that it falls under his prerogative to do so as an academic field trip. The three of them travel to Boston together, where Mary visits her pregnant sister, and the guys go on an adventure together, mostly touring museums. Again, this idea of a road trip which reveals deeper secrets held by the characters is not a very original idea for a story, but there are sufficient twists and turns that it's an enjoyable fresh take on an old idea. This film is one of several this year in which the cinematography and style of the film is a recreation or perhaps an homage to the time period in which the film is set. The trailer has a style of typical films of the early 1970s. The film opens with a MPAA R rating card, identical to what you would have seen on a film from that era. This is followed by the logos for Universal Studios, Focus Features, and Miramax, which are throwbacks to the ones you would have seen in 1970. I viewed the film as a digital download, but these opening logos featured film scratches as well as pops and crackles in the soundtrack of a typical well-worn print of a film. Although the movie was shot using modern digital cameras, director Alexander Payne and cinematographer Eldil Brild have gone to great pains to make it look as though it was shot on 35mm film in 1970. It even has a mono soundtrack with the high-end frequencies cut off at about 8 kilohertz. Brild said they were trying to make it look as though someone found some old film cans in a garage. Now, these effects throughout the film are not as blatant as they are in the opening credits, but there's still much about the cinematography that evokes that era. It's a subtle psychological manipulation that helps the audience buy into the setting. We'll see that same phenomena in another Oscar-nominated film later. Giamatti gives his usual magnificent performance under the direction of Alexander Payne. The two had previously worked together on the film Sideways. Giamatti has already won the Golden Globe for Best Lead Actor in a Musical or Comedy for the film, and is nominated for Best Actor Oscar, both of which are well-deserved. Note that the Golden Globes have separate categories for drama versus musical or comedy, so the competition for Oscars is much tighter in the open Best Actor category. He really doesn't have a chance against stiff, dramatic competition. And he would be my third choice, but don't take that as a slight, because I very much enjoyed his performance. The cafeteria manager, Mary, is portrayed by Devane Joy Randolph, who's already earned a Supporting Actress Golden Globe and is nominated for Supporting Actress. Again, very much deserved. I really enjoyed her performances as Detective Williams in the Hulu series Only Murders in the Building, but she was otherwise unknown to me. Her credits include a Tony nomination in 2012, and she's also appearing briefly as Mahalia Jackson in this year's film Rustin. Right now, I would list her second as my favorite supporting actress for the year, but I've not yet seen all of the other nominees. She has really stiff competition. Angus Tully is played by newcomer Dominic Sessa in his first film. He holds his own against a veteran actor like Giamatti. Carrie Preston is also quite charming as Miss Crane. You might recognize her from her role as the quirky lawyer Elspeth Tascone in the TV series The Good Wife and its spin-off series The Good Fight. She also appeared as waitress Arlene in over 80 episodes of the HBO vampire series True Blood. In addition to the Best Picture nomination, David Hemmingson is nominated for his original screenplay, and it's a close second for me in that category. Now, it might seem strange that this was one of my favorite screenplays of the year, given that I've been pointing out all of the unoriginal or unsurprising aspects of the story. But it truly is an interesting and fresh take on some old ideas. There were plot points I didn't see coming that I haven't spoiled for you here. Giamatti's dialogue is cleverly written, and he's a richly drawn character, as is Mary, even if some of the minor characters are somewhat stereotypical. The film is also nominated for film editing, for which I have no opinion. I would have thought it would have gone to cinematography for creating the retro look from a digital source, but it wasn't nominated for that category. The film doesn't have a chance for Best Picture against very stiff competition, but I would rank it as my fourth favorite of the 10 nominated films. It's very much well worth your time. The IMDb lists 195 award nominations and 107 wins so far. Again, they list an awful lot of obscure awards. Among them are nominations for Alexander Payne from the Directors Guild, SAG nominations for Giamatti and Randolph, as well as 7 BAFTA nominations. I couldn't find the estimated budget for the film, but since its opening in late October, it's earned over $30 million worldwide and nearly $20 million in the U.S. It's still showing in some theaters and is currently streaming on Peacock, as well as available for rent or purchase from Amazon Prime and YouTube. Our second film this week is also the story of a somewhat sad intellectual academic who faces struggles in both his work and his personal life. American Fiction stars Jeffrey Wright as Thelonious Ellison, who has had some success writing novels and is teaching a college literature course. The film's set in present day. He's struggling to sell his latest work because publishers claim that as an African-American author, his work isn't black enough. In the opening scene, he's teaching a course on American literature in the South. A white girl in his class was offended that they were studying a book with the N-word in the title. He declares to the girl, "I got over it. You can too." She files a complaint against him, which is apparently just the latest of many complaints, and he's forced to take a sabbatical. In an early scene in the film, he goes into a bookstore and asks the 20-something-year-old white sales clerk if they have any books by Thelonious Ellison. The young man looks at his tablet and then leads him to a bookshelf labeled African American Studies. Ellison asks,
"Wait a minute, why are these books here?"
I'm not sure. I would imagine that this author, Ellison, is black.
That's me, Ellison. Yeah. He is me, and he and I are black.
Oh, bingo.
No bingo, Ned. These books have nothing to do with African American studies. They're just literature. The blackest thing about this one is the ink.
I don't decide what sections the books go in, and no one here does. That's how chain stores work.
Ellison then gathers up a dozen or so copies of his 3 books and proceeds to march them over to the general fiction section where they belong. Thelonious, who goes by the nickname Monk, no doubt because of the famed jazz musician Thelonious Monk, is frustrated that his sympathetic agent cannot find a publisher for his latest work. Meanwhile, he is outraged over the success of a book written by an African-American academic woman named Sinatra Golden. Her bestseller, titled We Live in the Ghetto, is filled with stereotypes of poor black people who talk a kind of jive talk street language that is so exaggerated it's offensive to him.
What really struck me was that too few books were about my people. Where are our stories? Where's our representation?
Would you give us the pleasure of reading an excerpt?
Yo, Sharonda, girl, you be pregnant again? If I is, Ray Ray's gonna be a real father this time around.
To retaliate, he writes a ghetto book about a drug dealer who grew up poor, murdered his father, and has the exaggerated stereotype of a ghetto black man. The working title of the book is My Pathology. He spelled it Pathology. He writes under the pseudonym Stag R. Lee. He instructs his agent to submit it to publishers as a joke, but much to the surprise, a publisher snaps it up. He's given a massive advance and a lucrative deal for the movie rights. When the publisher wants to meet the author, he has to create a new persona. He refuses to meet in person because he claims he's a wanted criminal. He'll only speak to him over the phone. In an attempt to get out of this farce, he does everything he can do to try to ruin the deal, insisting that the title of the book be changed to the single word, fuck. Much to his surprise, his white publisher reluctantly agrees. This satire of white people's opinion of what black culture is all about makes it hysterically funny and ironic. It's also a stinging indictment of the publishing world, who is anxious to prove its commitment to diversity while exploiting stereotypes. However, that's not the only story being told. This is a deeply personal and poignant exploration of a troubled soul. Monk struggles in his romantic relationships. He has a difficult relationship with his gay brother. His mother is declining with dementia, and he suffers other personal losses that I won't spoil. He's frustrated that his own serious work is rejected, but this piece of sellout trash he's created is a huge success. He's becoming everything he hates. These two storylines are brilliantly woven together by writer-director Cord Jefferson. Jefferson's been nominated by the Directors Guild for an outstanding first film. There's one shot in the film that I thought was one of the most brilliant shot compositions I've seen in a long time. It's a simple shot of someone's feet that tells an entire story, like an excellently crafted piece of flash fiction. You'll know it when you see it. Jefferson's screenplay, based on the novel by Percival Everett, is nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay Oscar. In addition to the Best Picture Oscar nomination, it was also nominated for a Golden Globe in the Best Musical or Comedy category. Jeffrey Wright, who's known mostly for his supporting roles, steps up to the challenge of portraying this complex lead character with a conflicted life. The performance has earned him a Best Actor Oscar nomination, as well as a nomination for the Golden Globe Actor in a Musical or Comedy. He's joined by a talented ensemble cast that includes Sterling K. Brown as his brother, which earned him a Supporting Actor Oscar nomination. Also, Tracy Ellis Ross is his sister, Leslie Uggams is his mother, Erica Alexander is his girlfriend, Issa Rae is the rival author Sinatra Goldman, and John Ortiz as his agent. All turn in memorable performances. Even minor characters, such as his mother's caregiver, and her boyfriend, a town police officer, add charm and wit to the effort. Wright, Brown, as well as the entire ensemble have earned SAG nominations. The IMDb lists 162 nominations and 52 wins. The film only opened in December and has earned just over $12 million. It's currently available only in theaters. Jeffrey Wright could be a long shot for Best Actor, but will probably lose to Cillian Murphy in Oppenheimer or Bradley Cooper in Maestro. I would put the screenplay as a tie for Best Screenplay against Anatomy of a Fall, and I would rank it about 5th place in my favorite movie of the year. I highly recommend it. Next week we will take a look at 2 foreign language films. One of them I thought was just okay. The other one kept me glued to the screen, wondering what was going to happen next. It featured one of my favorite screenplays of the year and some amazing performances. So be sure to check that out. If you find this podcast educational, entertaining, enlightening, or even inspiring, consider sponsoring me on Patreon for just $5 per month. You'll get early access to the podcast and other exclusive content. Although finances are tight, I don't do this for the money, but every little bit helps. As always, my deepest thanks to my financial supporters. It expresses your support of what I'm doing, and I'll never be able to express how much that means to me. Even if you can't provide financial support, please share links. I just want people to be able to hear my stories. You can check out my back episodes, all of which are available where you found this episode. If you have comments, questions, or other feedback, feel free to comment on any of the platforms where you find the podcast. Tell me what you did or didn't like about any of these films. I'll see you next week as we continue contemplating life. Until then, fly safe, everyone.